Good evening, wherever you are out there on the internet. Welcome to the United States Police Canine Association Scent Work Fundamentals webinar on Detector Dog Strategies and Tactics. This is part two of a three-part series on scent work fundamentals. And stay tuned or come back to us next month for patrol dog strategies and tactics. As we dive into this, let's go ahead and talk about what we're looking at today. I will essentially tell you what I'm going to tell you, then I'll tell you what I have to tell you, and then I'll tell you what I told you as we go through this. The search behaviors that we're talking about for any detection work, I don't care what type of odor you're looking for, all search work is basically a three behavior chain. We'll talk about those behaviors and how it changes. We'll talk about the roles between the handler and dog and what are the responsibilities between those roles and how it plays out. We'll also talk about the strategies you can employ as a detector dog handler during the course of this, where your focus should be. Strategies are about big picture things. What are the most important things? Then we'll talk about tactics specifically for narcotic detector dogs. I think actually, to be fair, we're going to talk about universal tactics, and then we're going to talk about considerations as they apply to detector dogs, explosive detection dogs, and search and rescue dogs. Those being the three kinds that we most often have in a law enforcement context. Correction context will apply also, and we'll talk about that in a little bit too. And then we'll talk about what this means for you in operations as we go through this. That behavior chain we're talking about, that's universal to every kind of search work, is any whiff of the target odor, locate the strongest concentration of target odor available to the dog, and report that they found it. Now, this may ruffle some feathers on this, particularly when we get to this part of the locate piece. And I've used the phrase the strongest concentration of target odor available for a reason. And that is, I have yet to have anybody tell me what chemical difference there is as something goes out there, other than there may be oxidation and things starting to change their chemical contents to determine freshness. And that may be a factor. But concentration is a pretty good approximation of what dogs are looking for. Now, if freshness is a piece of it, we've got more research to do to get there, and I'm going to have a conversation with some really good scent work people tomorrow, so maybe that will come out and we can talk more about that. But this is an important thing to think about because if you're thinking about the concentration of the target odor, there are plenty of times in which circumstances can set up that as the dog is working to it, the concentration of odor available to the dog may not be at source. It may not even be close to source. It can be on the opposite side of the room. So that's one of the things we have to bear in mind as we go through this, that if the dog does its job of finding the strongest concentration of odor available, trying to force it to go to source teaches it not to trust its nose. So this is a really important thing we have to consider. We have to decide about what's important to us on this. And as we go through this, one of the things we have to realize that folds into who does what during the search process. Our roles are pretty clear. The dog is a detector. Their job is to process an area, an object, and see if they detect the target odor. The handler's job is to make sure that search covers the bases. That means you got to have a systematic approach to that search. You can free search and let the dog run free and do their thing, but you should watch what's happening enough to make sure that areas are addressed that might have been missed by the dog. And we'll talk more about that as we go through this. So that means you've got to be able to read dog behavior because very often dogs will get an odor and they'll give you a change of behavior long before they give you a trained final response, if they have one. And also, you have to read dog behavior to know when the dog is out of odor or off a track. The important part being that ability to distinguish when the dog is in and out of odor is what sets you apart from anybody who's just following a dog and waiting for a trained final response. In that regard, you're strictly a search manager, an analyst, and an interpreter. So in other words, you make sure things get covered, you see what the dog is doing, you analyze that information, you make interpretations based on that. They're inferences. The dog can't tell you for sure, but we make those inferences based on what we see the dog doing. Then together as a team, the team's role is to locate the subject, the target odor, or whatever it is, or to clear the area. There's 2 different jobs there that can happen for us in there, and we'll talk more about that and get into the different types of detection that we do. So, let's wade into this. The primary concerns when we start talking about strategies are what will govern which strategy you use. So it's really important to think about this as you go through this. When you decide what your strategy is going to be, whether that's in the moment right before you deploy the dog in operations, or when you're training that dog to get it ready for the job, you have to decide what's most important. Where are your risks? Where are your opportunities? What are the threats? And what are your strengths and weaknesses? And as you go through that SWOT analysis, you'll come up with what's most important. But in reality, there's a couple things we've got to deal with. And that is that, is location of the specific spot the most important thing for you? Or is that dog's ability to truly tell you where the strongest concentration is most important? Because we can infer where a location is or could be based on that strongest concentration of odor. Also have to decide whether your dog is actually a search dog or you're an examination dog. This is one of those things that I think a lot of canine handlers, a lot of canine trainers don't consider. That for certain types of detector dog work, your task is more than searching and trying to find something in an area. Your job is to clear that area and make it safe for people to come in if you're an explosive detection dog, for example. A lot of explosion detection work is really about clearing objects or places to give people peace of mind when handling or entering. So, as a part of that, they may locate something, and if they do, that's great. Where we run into problems, if a dog is solely focused on location and searches are about locating things, very often they can miss things because they're so focused on the location that they don't truly examine things with the level of detail that's required to find those odors that are different. Some odors are big. You can smell them across the room, and others are like Kool-Aid. You can't smell it unless you get your nose past the edge of the Dixie cup. So it's really important that we make a decision about what we're going to be doing with our dogs. And so toward that end, we're going to have to decide how we're going to accept the fact that we're only human and our dogs aren't even that there will be mistakes made. And if you have an error bias, what's going to hurt you more, misses or falses? And so we'll talk about that here at this next slide. When we think about this, for example, in narcotics work tends to be search centric. Part of that is because most of the time when a narcotics dog is applied, there is probable cause or at least reasonable suspicion to believe there's going to be something there. So, coming with that in mind, your job is to find that thing that you think is probably going to be there. Examination to clear things is a secondary consideration. You may see that more with customs dogs working at the border, prison dogs working in a corrections environment, things like that. So, when you think about this, what's going to get a narcotics dog in trouble most often? What's going to take them off the street? Probably, is it going to be falses or misses? Falses have a high price. Those are what get people sued. Those deprive people of their civil rights. There's a priority on that. And a lot of times, if a narcotics dogs miss something on an operational search in a law enforcement context, nobody knows. That substance may get through and may eventually injure or kill somebody, but there isn't a causal connection between that dog's work and that particular piece of narcotics that got through. So whether we like it or not, falses generate measurable costs that can be linked to the dog. And it may not just be a false, it may just be a non-productive response. That dog may be right, but it's beyond our capability to gather the physical evidence to confirm the dog is right. But one way or the other, non-productive responses, whether you call them false or not, have measurable costs that people think about. Police chiefs have to think about, are we getting sued? And so that very often winds up with narcotics handlers tending to bias their training in such a way that they want to avoid falses. They'll accept a little miss here and there, but they want to make sure they get the big stuff and they want to make sure they don't false. Conversely, when you go to explosive detection dogs, they're examination centric. Most explosive detection dogs will go through their entire career without ever finding a live device. It's a really important thing to remember that the work fundamentally is different than the narcotics work. Narcotics work, if done where there's reasonable suspicion or probable cause to believe something's going to be there, the work trains the dog. Explosive detection dogs, because they're mostly clearing space or clearing objects so that people can enter that space or handle that object, wind up mostly never finding anything. And so your training has to support a dog that is not going to get reinforced by the work itself. So essentially, because they're examination centric, you got to keep them up to the point they're willing to search and locate something when it's there. That is really hard work. Explosive detection dogs, it's harder work than most people imagine because of the fact that the work doesn't train the dog. Now, we look at this, and the bias that we look at this is because explosive detection, the costs are so tragic and they can be immediately tied to a dog that might have missed something. You really put a bias on this, and most systems that are out there will bias what they'll allow from a dog in terms of non-productive responses over what they'll allow for misses for explosives. So, for example, the explosives, if a bad thing happens, checking a cruise ship and that cruise ship goes out with bomb on it, boom, bad things happen, boats sink, people die. That's a tragic cost right off the bat that we can know about. But if a dog has a non-productive response, that same dog on that same cruise ship has a non-productive response, then all of a sudden, what you find is somebody gets inconvenienced. It may be passengers that get inconvenienced. It may be the crew, the staff, it may be the longshoreman loading. All those people may be inconvenienced, but that cost of inconvenience is far lower than the cost of a miss. And so the bias goes for explosive dogs. You're going to make sure that those dogs don't miss something, that they pay attention and stay true to their examination task and locate everything that could be there. Search and rescue, on the other side, is a hybrid because search and rescue operations are generally done under direction of some kind of a search manager, and they're going to wind up having to make sure that areas that are assigned to them are either clear or they found evidence of human presence in them or they find the person. And as a result, search and rescue dogs wind up having to balance the miss to false ratio better because the costs of a miss in a search and rescue context are huge. And I've been involved in search and rescue operations, particularly when I was a deputy sheriff, where a dog miss was found out about much later on. And it was devastating to that handler to find out that they had been close but hadn't been right. So that's one of those things that you want to make sure you don't do. At the same time, you don't wanna sit there and pull all the resources to an area because you think you picked up something, but you can't locate it. So you wanna make sure that you really do get good at reading your dog and that your dog is really clear about its job. Now, I'm gonna dip now. We're gonna talk about why we make our decisions. And if you take a look at this, I'm gonna show you this brief video, and then I'm gonna show another video that runs longer, but I'll show you a piece of it so that you can see what we're talking about. Okay, watch closely this right now and tell me the moment, just tell yourself at the moment you think that this dog is in odor. All right. Very clear change of behavior. The dog might have been odor from the very moment it walked into the room and walked that wall for that reason. We don't know. We can't read the dog's mind, but we know that we saw a clear change of behavior as the dog passed by the electrical panels, came back, bracketed to what seemed to be the strongest concentration the dog could reach, and came to a trained final response of a sit. Now, the next video I'm going to show you is
Are you ready to have some fun? Hey, handsome.
Owings
Barbara.
and one of her students going
Come to
through
work.
a search in this sport, searching for the odors of clove, anise, I don't know what the other one is, but you're going to see something a little different.
Alert. Good.
Called alert right there. Dog
Okay.
comes get paid. Off we go back to the task.
Alert. Good. Okay.
All right.
Good boy.
All right, we'll go watch one more.
Alert. Good. Play.
All right, I think that will get us through this. As we look at those two videos, the contrast between those two, imagine that you are presenting that as body cam video for a jury or a judge or maybe a prosecutor who's going to be handling the case. Which one is going to be easier to convince that jury, that judge, or that prosecutor that the dog's indication was clear? And I think it's fair to say it's probably the sit response as opposed to that brief freeze and change in behavior that was being called in the canine nose work thing, because the objectives are different. Canine nose work is a sport. People compete, people are trying to win. And one of the things that determines how they proceed is the fact that it's a timed sport. So the time it takes to acquire the sit and then process things after that can be seconds. But that particular one had, I think, 9 different hides in that area that we had. We only saw 3 of them. If you take a look at that 9 seconds, 9 times that it takes could be the difference between first place and not being on the podium at all. So they bias their training for that rapid read on the dog, making their call, and then moving on to the next one. These are trade-offs. Just like the trade-off we make, for example, if we decide we're gonna use a food reward dog or a toy reward dog. They both work. People have been successful with them, but there are trade-offs that we make when you make that decision. And I'm not gonna get into the particulars on this because the reality is there are no solutions. Everything's about trade-offs, and you have to decide what trade-offs you're willing to live with. And you have to decide, what are you willing to give up to get what you want? You can take a look at 2 European tracking dog trainers who are very good, Tobias Gustafsson and Dick Stahl, and you will see they have very, very precise tracking dogs. One is a firm believer in food reward and using just kibble, nothing fancy, and the other one uses play and toys. If someone were coming to try to find me and I was lost and one of those dogs was doing the tracking, I would have been happy with either one of them. So they both can work. Just have to decide with what's going to work, and you have to decide what's gonna work well for the dog and handler you have in front of you at that time. If you think there's only one way to do things, you're probably selling yourself short. Now, there may be one way that works well for you and the people you're working with, and you wanna stick with it because if it ain't broke enough, you wanna fix it, knock yourself out. But if you're always gonna be a student of the business, never consider yourself an expert, consider yourself a student of this business and that you want to get better at it, then you're always gonna try and improve. And as we go through this, we start thinking about, okay, we have our idea of what's important to us. Is it misses? Is it non-productive responses? Am I gonna be food reward? Am I gonna be play reward? One way or the other, there are going to be universal tactics you're going to employ while you're working with search dogs, and we'll go through them in more detail, but they're basically going to be first and foremost, you got to develop a search plan. You have to decide how to manage the wind, and generally that's going to be you're going to be working crosswind from downwind. I would recommend that if you have big areas and buildings and things like that, you start outside and work inside, and then you manage your interior perimeter, then you manage objects or the exterior perimeter of places. And then there are things that you have to take into account while you're working on interiors. And as we go through this, the same thing is going to happen when you get outside. You're going to have a dynamic environment. It's not like training. You have to go ahead and do everything you can in training to get the dog's foundation solid in a clean, sterile environment, and then pretty quickly get them used to working amidst the chaos of the world, whether that's inside a building with HVAC running or outside on a windy day. One way or the other, dogs have to be ready for the job, and that comes with setting them up with strong, solid behaviors in the beginning and then working from there. So, first part of our tactics is search planning. And as a search plan, you have to decide, is my objective to clear space and give people peace of mind, or is it to find? Now, if you keep your dog focused on finding, that could build a lot of energy. Dogs that are focused on the hunt and the find bring energy to the search. But in the process, they can do things that kind of get in the way of their making sure that everything's been checked. And so the objective at that point for us is to go through this and take a look at it. For example, dogs tend not to want to go into corners in a room. Dogs move in curves. They don't move with straight lines very often. We have to look at this. We have to make a decision about that. We have to make a decision is what we're looking for, does it have an inherent risk? When we talk about patrol dogs and looking for suspects, okay, there's inherent risk there. But if you're a narcotics dog, well, there's an inherent risk in this. If your dog gets a hold of some of the narcotics, it's going to get them very sick or kill them. If the dog actually just inhales enough fentanyl, that will be enough to kill them. So there's inherent risk there. Same thing with explosive detection. If a dog bites off a piece of dynamite and swallows it, they probably won't make it to the vet clinic. Their blood pressure will drop so fast and boom, they're gone. So you have to make a decision that takes into account the risks your dog's going to face. Look for hazards. Are there inherent risks in what you're looking for? Are there inherent risks in the environment? Is it a warehouse with chemical spills or chemical vats, things like that? You have to look and consider this. Are there nails? Are there sharp objects? For example, like expanded metal graded stairs that people climb up. Dog's paws can get stuck in it and they can wind up tearing a pad. So it's really important to consider your environment before you bring the dog into search. You want to look at the environmental factors that you're going to have to consider. Are you going to be contending with a hot wall, cold wall situation? Do you have HVAC? Is the surface safe for the dog to walk on? Or are there a lot of things that are unstable that you're going to have to figure out how to address and keep everybody, including the dog, safe? As you go through this, what is the airflow? Try to figure out the airflow before you actually start the search. Get a sense of that so that you can plan your search to work and use airflow to your advantage. So many times we just walk in and we don't know what we're doing. Patrol dogs, you're kind of stuck with that. But the detector dogs, we have some luxuries. We usually apply our dogs when a scene is secured, and it gives us a chance to go ahead and check these things out and make a decision on it. And what are your support resources? Do you have things that will aid your search? Do you have people there with mirrors, with hand wands to back up a response if you get it? Do you have somebody that will secure the area while you're getting ready to search it and make sure that you're safe and perhaps the people that live there that may be suspects aren't going to interfere with it? And you have to make a decision about who does what. What are the team's tactics? What are the team's roles? Everything gets cleared up that way. And you also have to know what happens if you actually find something. I was working explosive detection after 9/11, checking ship stores for cruise ships before they went off out to sea to sail up to Alaska. My dog had a response on something. Initially, we didn't know what it was. We just knew that one dog hit it, then the other dog hit it, and nobody on the security side. Our job was done. Once we had that find, we told the security managers that we found it. Then it was up to them. They didn't have a procedure in place about what to do when something was found. And that caused all kinds of chaos. There are other circumstances I've had in the law enforcement context where there wasn't adequate planning about what to do if there's a fine. So this is really important. Think about this. Get it set up. Have everybody know exactly what's going to happen if that dog gives you that trained final response and you make the call. Okay, so we talked about working the wind, working from downwind by going crosswind. So it's kind of important that you go roughly perpendicular to the wind as best you can, and you'll work a pattern until your dog shows a change of behavior. And this gives you the advantage. Remember, in our tactical concepts model, because we're still employing in a law enforcement context, maybe we're not patrol dogs, but there's still risk out there that we're facing. Your friends are time, distance, angles, and shielding. And one of the things that a dog's response can give you is distance before you decide you're going to get in close. They can give you a warning from a distance away that something is there and you're going to be getting close to it. For an explosive detection dog, that may be a really important thing. For a narcotics detection dog, again, an important thing. And it's important that when we do this, if we're given an area to search, you might want to search beyond the edges of the boundaries that you're given. Just go out a bit beyond it. Why? Because air and odor transferred as air is no respecter of our boundaries. It will go where it goes. So you might as well cover the bases by getting out where it could be. The classic example is you have like a fenced junkyard to search. It's somebody's breaking in, stealing auto parts. and you go in through the business door at the front door, not knowing there is somebody on the roof right over your head as you go in there. But if you had brought your dog from that downwind side a little farther away before you got into the search area, which is the junkyard on the other side of the building, your dog might have given you an indication that person was up on that roof. I know because it happened in real life. So we set it up in training and we replicated it. That's what you should do. When something doesn't go right, whether it's in training or in real operations, set it up in training, replicate it, and come up with strategies and tactics that will get you through that. Okay, so now here, for example, you have your search area bounded by the blue dotted line right there, and you're going to go ahead and start. The wind is coming from top of screen to bottom of screen like that, north to south, for example. You're going to start your search. You're going to start down at the bottom outside the boundary until you're past the edge of the other side. Then you'll move up a bit, maybe 5, 10 yards, something like that. And then you can go across. This is one approach. It's not the only approach, but this is one approach. You keep this process up, going outside and up, across, outside, up, across. At one point, as you do this, you may see your dog make a change of behavior. He's been walking with you out in front of you, everything's fine, and all of a sudden you'll see that dog's gait change. And then the nose will come up, the nose will turn into the wind, and they'll start to curve and move that way, and they'll want to pull. At that point, that change of behavior may be the point at which you just let the dog process this. And you'll see that dog, instead of making those nice perpendicular lines, is going to zigzag. And what they were doing is working that scent plume coming from the source that you see up here at the top. That's the basic approach to doing an open area search that I was taught back in 1975 when I went through my patrol dog school at Lackland Air Force Base. It still applies to this day. It's still a good, solid approach. There are other approaches, but almost every approach that's going to be efficient and effective and optimize safety is going to involve working from downwind and going crosswind. And as we proceed through this process, we look at what we're doing. If you decide or you are forced because of the circumstances to work from upwind, come into this node that you're going to get little or no warning when you come on something. You'll get past it a little bit and then boom, you're going to be right on top of it. These are what I call button hook finds. Also, if something is elevated higher, you'll get farther away from it, farther downwind with your back to it. That's risk. And you want to think about this and how it's going to go. As a detector dog, just because you're looking for dope doesn't mean there isn't a doper there. Just because you're looking for explosive doesn't mean you don't have somebody that was planting that explosive there and could trigger it. So it's important to realize that you can maximize safety and give your dog the best chance to process the odor working from the downwind side rather than the upwind side. So let's talk about the outside to inside approach. If you take a look at this, every building, there's an outside, there's an inside, and then there are things that are on the inside, and there are things on the outside. And as you address those things, there's an approach you can take. One of the things to remember with this approach is you deal with the exterior first. And I'm going to tell you the same thing. If you're working a detector dog, you have the luxury that patrol dogs may not have to have the area secure before you do this. If you have that luxury and you can do it, take it. Make sure people have secured that area and it's safe for you to search. You're looking for evidence at that point. So that means that if the area is secure, then you have the luxury of being able to survey your search area. Before you bring the dog out, you can look and see what you've got. I certify over 100 detector dogs a year. And one of the things that I do before these people get it, I give them the opportunity to survey the place they're going to search before they actually search it, before they search the objects they're going to search. Because I think that if you've got that ability when you're working, you should take advantage of it. I would recommend that when you talk about searching the exterior, you look beyond the building's footprint. You look at the attached shrubbery around it, maybe even vehicles and small outbuildings that are close to it. Get them addressed first before you deal with the bigger chunks there. Those peripheral objects are anything from cars to trailers to farm equipment. We've seen it all, and we've seen stuff hidden on it all. So it's really important to remember they're part of your search area. Okay, address them. Then take a look as you go through the space at the things that are going to affect the search based on airflow. And doors and windows tend to do that. Ledges also, because if wind is flowing over a building, a ledge creates turbulence and it can change the way the airflow goes. Think about how you want to address that. A lot of those things may be there, and they're also going to be the doors and windows in particular are going to be things you have to deal with when you get on the inside. So knowing where your doors and windows are as you go around can make a decision about, do I want to address those things first because there's more chance for turbulence in those areas, or do I want to address those last? Depends upon you, depends upon your dog. You make your choice, you make your trade-off. Remember, no solutions, only trade-offs. Once you've done the exterior, then you do the interior. You survey it first, just like you did before. You work from the perimeter inward. I like working from where I come into the building to a known exit point. Maybe I'll give my dog a break, come back in through that exit point, work around the rest of the building, get back to that original entry point or another exit point. Working your way through, chunking this search down into small, manageable pieces. Also making sure that you don't work your dog beyond their behavioral and physical stamina. And when you go into a room, remember that room contains objects and it's going to change your strategy, your tactics, your technique. A room that's empty with nothing on it is just empty space and you're dealing with that. Maybe crossing it enough in the middle to make sure there's nothing suspended in the ceiling. You go from there. But if you take a look at this, when you're going through a perimeter search, you want to go ahead again, just like you did before. We talked about going beyond the footprint, starting down. I like to start downwind. So I like to start on the exterior of a building where the wind is working in my favor and might carry my dog up towards something whenever possible. Knowing that as I go around the building, I'm going to be downwind on one leg, crosswind on another, upwind on another, crosswind on another. As you go around that, and that's just with the four sides. If you have something more complex, you're going to have nooks and crannies you have to deal with. I'm working this and my dog is used to heeling on my left side, I will probably go counterclockwise. Now, if you have somebody who heels the dog on the right side, you're going to go the other way if you choose. A lot of people stick with the convention of going counterclockwise around the exterior of a building or around an object. In fact, it's pretty much the same thing when you look at it. So if you look at it, you're going to start at one point and go around the corner, and then you'll go around the next corner. Then you work your way around to where you started. Okay, we've got that covered, exterior's covered. We can go ahead and go into the building if we want to. And we'll talk about that in a moment because as you're dealing with that, you have to deal with other things. Now, think of a building as an object. If you scale that down, any object you search is going to be available for you to search. So, objects, you're going to go counterclockwise. Same thing like you do that. If you are a left-handed healer and you're presenting with you're holding your lead with your weak hand and you're presenting with your strong hand, which by the way keeps that strong hand free in case you wind up having to reach for a weapon or anything like that, you can go from there. Working around in this manner, you want to go ahead and make sure that you present the PAs, the productive areas. It's important. You can use an up and down pattern like this. You can use a dog that works the nexus between that. They work the vertical along one seam and the horizontal like that. I've seen dogs that can find boxes in this configure or find hot boxes in this configuration by just going around the horizontal seam. But if you want to cover it, you're going to make sure that you check everything on every surface all the way around because that's what clearance is truly about. When you're outside a building and you're looking at the things that are gonna kinda get in the way or things that will affect scent flow, you gotta consider the fact that the wind is there. We always deal with that. We've talked about that there. But also that sunlit walls are gonna change things. If you have a wall that's being lit by the sun, it creates an updraft at that wall. And if you have something high in that wall above the dog's nose or head, it could be just literally barely above it, but that updraft can be enough that your dog won't be able to access the odor. So it's really important that you take this into account and realize that shadowed walls are gonna have the opposite effect. They're gonna be the cold side. Things are gonna drop there unless the building overall is hot enough that it's a heat source that carries around, and that's, one of the things that people in really hot environments are gonna have to contend with is that buildings tend to store heat even on the shadowed side. Then things can run up there. So take a look at the walls and consider how they're going to affect the way air is going to flow. Look at doors or windows. Also realize that a door, if you have something near it and you have a low pressure area inside that door and a high pressure on the outside, you could have an odor right near there and it will suck it inside the building where you won't be able to detect it on the exterior. So bear it in mind. You're going to get a chance to search that when you go around the rest of the way and you get on the interior, you'll handle each of those doors and windows. You may see a change in behavior, dog, but not a final response because they haven't got a point source strong enough or a difference in gradients between weak and strong that is sufficient enough for the dog to say, yeah, this is my hot spot. Remember, they're playing this hot and cold game. It's, it's cold, 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 warm, 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 warmer, warm, hot. Yeah, this is the spot. Warmer. No, no, we'll go back to hot and that's it. That's the way they usually locate something. But what if you have something where the odor is kind of diffuse and coming out roughly equally all the way around? It gets very hard for them to make that gradient shift that says this is the hot spot. And so you may see a change of behavior rather than your trained final response. Rather than being upset about it, just look at that as cool. We're going to have an opportunity to train something new my dog hasn't really figured out before. Because all that means when the dog doesn't perform the way you expect is that you just asked it to deliver something you haven't prepared it to deliver yet. Overhangs, again, just like we talked about before, they create turbulence. And very often, something that is on an overhang, particularly if it's on the downwind side, that odor can blow out way away from the building and you won't smell it near the building. So you got to get far enough away. Then what will happen is because it's coming from overhead, as you walk towards the building, you see your dog's nose up, all of a sudden it gets closer to the building and it loses it. And that's because that flow is going over the dog's head until where they can smell it out there. Just always remember when that happens, you better get somebody to go ahead and check that overhang for you, not only for the target odor you're looking for, but anybody who might be there with it. It's going to be not only a place where things can be hidden, but vegetation can also be a heat source that will make the odors chimney upwards and away from the dog. And you'll have the same effect where they'll pick it up somewhere downwind in a cooler area where the air has had a chance to cool and the odor starts to drop. They'll run into it. And then as they get closer to where the source actually is at the tree, they're not there anymore. So unless they get their nose right on that tree and they smell where somebody was carrying it up and it got a little bit of collected scent there, they may not tell you that it's in that tree. But if you see them arcing around it, yeah, that's probably a good piece of information about that. Drainage systems are another thing. Drainage systems and railroad tracks tend to be heat sinks. They tend to be cold. They tend to pull things down. And very often you could put something in one of those and a dog won't smell it because the cold air of water moving underneath where something is, underneath the drainage vault or something like that, can pull it away and pull it down the drain system rather than coming up to you where you're at. It depends upon the odor you're working with and the conditions, but bear in mind that's something that might take extra attention. Also realize that traffic has an effect. And I'm not just talking about cars driving by on the road. That does have an effect, creates turbulence that can change things. But the traffic of just, for example, being in a warehouse and forklifts moving around do the same thing. People walking around can be a distraction for your dog. Get your dog used to it. Animals in the area, same thing. Rural deputies working out in the county, you're going to be searching on land where there's likely to be animals and farm equipment. Get your dog used to it before you have to do it. Life gets better that way. Okay. So now, once we move to the inside of a building, our tactics are going to be a little different. Rather than going counterclockwise like we were on the exterior, we'll wind up thinking about this in a different way. Before we start the search, same thing. Because we have the luxury of probably having an area secured, see if you can scan that thing first and make a decision and let the dog in. There are two different approaches. Some people want to detail from the very beginning. Other people will let the dog enter the space and they'll just watch from the entry, just see what the dog does. If the dog locates something, fine and dandy. But if the dog doesn't locate something, they're looking to see changes of behavior that will then say to themselves, I want to check that area a little bit more. So they keep a mental map of changes of behavior, their mental changes of behavior map. Once they've got that, if they did that, they decided they scanned and they've seen that, then they'll detail. Now, If you detail from the very beginning, it's the same thing. You're detailing from the very beginning, you're doing the same thing that they are, you just don't have a spot you wanna emphasize. So you're gonna treat everything equally, and detailing means that you check productive areas, things where if something was hidden, this is where the odor is gonna come out. Seams, drawer edges, things like that. You wanna make sure that you get your dog into corners because things hidden in the corners very often can rise and the dog can pick them up, but if they don't get their nose really deep into that corner, they're not gonna pick it up. You'll come into the building and you're gonna start working in this time, you're gonna work clockwise around the space. Objects are in the way, you're gonna have to deal with them. I like to do my perimeter first and then deal with the next thing after that. As the dog goes around like this, you'll fill it out that way. But realize that as you go through this, there are adjacent rooms and you have to decide, I'm gonna do this whole room first and then clear the bathroom? Or are you gonna do perimeters for the big stuff first and then come back and finish this room and the things that are in it? As you go through this search, realize that once you're done with this and you've searched that perimeter by moving clockwise, every object in that is just like a building, just like a vehicle. It's gonna be one of those things you might go counterclockwise. If you're left-headed and your dog heels on the right-hand side, you may wanna go the other way, and you do what works for you. I'm just talking about one approach to this. Make sure that you use a system that works for you and your dog. Some dogs are too flighty that if you let them scan, they just run around and burn themselves out. Other dogs, just they're machines and they find everything up front, or they give you really clear changes you can follow up on. Some dogs that just hate the restriction of a detailed approach and work fine when you give them a little more laissez-faire approach. You've got to find what works for your dog because, again, no solutions, there's only trade-offs. As you go around those objects, you go counterclockwise on them, you're just gonna rinse and repeat for every object to be investigated in the space. And then maybe you got these 2 that are adjoining together, and then you'll go over here and finish this other room that's over here on the other side, having already done the perimeter on the outside of this. As we go through this process, just remember your job is to make sure your dog examines the productive areas, the places where odor could come out if something was hidden in or behind them. When we're dealing with the interiors, again, we have to deal with the fact that we're dealing with HVAC systems, fans, and things like that that push air around. If you can figure out where it's blowing and how to take advantage of it, you can use it. If you see a dog giving a response all over the place, all over the room. It's just everywhere you're going, you just can't figure it out. You may look at where the HVAC intake is and find that it's actually being transported by the HVAC in a diffuse fashion through all of the vents that come out from there. Just find out what's gonna work for you and then go on. Remember, doors and windows change the heat dynamics in a room, and that if there's any kind of opening, even if it's just an improperly sealed window or door, or one that's got a bit of a gap, it can create the Venturi effect, which means if there's an odor in that space and there's air moving outside the building, moving faster than the air inside the building, what can happen then is that creates a low pressure zone outside that door where it wants to suck air from the building out through that gap, and you'll see a concentration of odor or scent there. So in other words, you may see the dog struggling, not finding something, and then all of a sudden the dog is like sniffing at the bottom of the door, but you can't find anything on the other side of the door or whatever. That can be the Venturi effect, and you may wanna start looking elsewhere in that room, maybe high, maybe away from where the dog's nose can get to it to find how it's going out and dropping at that point. Treat furnishings like any other object that can hide stuff are worth examining. This is particularly important when you're dealing with the electronic media detection dogs, the so-called porn sniffing dogs, because what those electronic media detection dogs are doing is they are looking for something as small as a micro SD card, really, really small bits of electronic media, and that can be hidden anywhere. And I've seen some amazing successes with those dogs locating SD cards that are hidden in desks. that you just would never imagine someone had that was a hiding spot. Yet the dog gave the indication, further investigation reveals it's right. So be careful. Take the time to really investigate the furnishings that are in there. Also realize that movement within the space creates it. As I said before, inside a warehouse, I've seen passing forklifts that go in and out in between a couple of objects create problems. And it just starts to disturb things and changes the scent picture for the dogs. They have to learn to work through it, but it can be done, but only if you give them the chance to experience it and get some success doing the right things to get past it. And again, there's the ever present hot wall, cold wall phenomenon. Remember that if you have a warm environment, interior walls tend to be cooler, exterior walls tend to be warmer, absent any kind of ventilation to equalize things. And it doesn't take more than maybe 3/4 of a degree to 1 degree temperature difference to start creating a circular flow in a room where you'll see things on the hot side won't be detected close to them, but on the opposite side on the cold wall. So bear that in mind as you go through the process right there. And remember that the same thing can happen. Sun streaming through a window can heat an object up to the point where it creates an updraft. And if that object is above your dog's nose and it has something in it, your dog may not get it, but you may see some diffuse changes somewhere in that area. Bear those in mind. That is worth examining. Also, particularly in office environments and in commercial businesses and some warehouses and industrial places, you're going to have raised floors or suspended ceilings that the dogs are going to have to contend with. It's a really good exercise to put something up in a suspended ceiling and see how your dog handles it. Same thing with raised floors. Those raised floors are a lot of times in tech spaces where they have a computer room and they have all the wiring running underneath and they have the floor raised up by about, foot to 18 inches. And then you're walking on panels that are on a frame. Pull one of those up, put something there, see what your dog can do it. You'd be surprised how long you might have to wait for that to be available. Check all the things that you have to check when you go through this process. Now, when we get to narcotics dogs, one of the things we want to take a look at is we're not applying our dogs in neat and pristine environments. So get your dog used to chaos, clutter. Find things where your dog has to contend with that stuff and come in there. Realize also that one way or the other, your consideration is always going to be that you don't want to get someone's rights deprived because of your dog. So you want to avoid those faults and your air bias is going to be there. But don't mean that means that you accept too many misses. You want a dog that's reliable, as reliable as it can be at both aspects of this. Also realize that with narcotics, there's a real inherent risk of ingestion or exposure to dangerous chemicals. And so it's important. I'm a firm believer in passive response for narcotics detection dogs because I believe it keeps them safer. But the trade-off for that is some of the dogs aren't as good getting right to sources they could be, but that's still something that can be resolved through training and also through subsequent investigation and operations. One thing is build early conditioning where your dog is not, understand early conditioning. The law of primacy applies. The things we learn first, the things that have the deepest reinforcement histories are the things that we tend to do when we're under stress or when we're so excited that the forebrain isn't running the show quite so much. And with dogs, remember, they haven't got the kind of forebrain we do, so they're more subject to it than we are. So if your early conditioning involves, for example, associating odor by retrieving a PVC tube with odor in it, then that dog under stress is going to be likely to want to get its mouth on things. So bear in mind, there are a variety of different ways it can happen. You're going to have to prepare for that when you're working and realize that's in your dog's repertoire. You can't take it out. The only solution to pollution is dilution. That means you spend a lot of time training to teach that dog that that passive response is what keeps it safe and what gets it paid, because that's what the dog's in the game for. They want to get paid. Also, bear in mind that you've got environmental hazards you want to contend with. As you look at it, there are going to be things in that environment. For example, you may be looking for meth, but you stumble into a meth lab. I know the first one I walked into by accident, my partner and I both were sick for a couple of days afterwards, really bad headaches, things like that. Imagine what's going to happen to your dog there. So bear in mind, these are there. That's why searching or surveying the space and knowing what those hazards are will better prepare you to deal with them when you're actually doing the search. And also, narcotics is coming under more and more legal constraints. There are more and more legal constraints and things we have to consider. You have to know what's permitted in your circuit. Can your dog's nose cross the threshold of a car? In some circuits, yes. In some circuits, no. We don't have a national standard on that. So know your legal constraints because dopers have money. Dopers will wind up spending money to attack your dog's response in every way they possibly can. So bear that in mind. You want to go ahead and make what you do as truly professional as you possibly can, not because you don't want to get sued, but because you want to make the best legitimate case that you possibly can. If it's not there, your dog will tell you. If it's there, your dog will tell you. And your dog is reliable and consistent on this, operating within the constraints that you face. Also realize that there can be booby traps there. There can be things that are set there. There can be poison for your dogs. There could be explosive things like that. You want to make sure that you're looking for the things that tell you that there's a risk there that you might have to deal with. Now, when we're talking about explosive detection dogs, you want to make sure that you're looking for things that are going to be that. Your error bias is going to be, again, one of those things you don't want to miss. So you want to make sure you cover all bases. Your dog has to have the behavioral stamina to do those searches that are very long, very hard, lean reinforcement ratios, and you're gonna have to be able to fill in the blanks and help your dog out. Also, you're gonna have to realize that if you find one device, you better assume there's another one there. Secondary devices are a very real thing, and in fact, it's entirely possible that somebody could design something that is more enticing to the dog just to get somebody there, and then the secondary device has an odor that's less enticing but is just as deadly, and now that's a trap for the dog. And so we have to be careful about what we're doing. We have to look at things, innocuous things. We all thought, hey, pressure cookers were just a great way for grandma to make stew. Well, they also are used as vessels for explosives. So we have to look at things and consider everything we're looking at as is it possible that that innocent thing can be converted into an improvised explosive device? And we look for that stuff as we continue our search. Chemical ingestion is still a problem. Like I said, nitrate poisoning is very fast and very deadly. So that's why we want our passive response really solid. And we talked about that law of primacy and how the odor is conditioned on this. And the environmental hazards. A lot of times when you're doing detection work, let's say you're in a law enforcement context and you're doing clearing stadiums. I don't know, for people who haven't done it before, but walking along the seats in a stadium and then having the dog all of a sudden smell something 2 rows down, getting that dog to that odor can be a bit of a challenge, whether you go around and have them come back to it or you have them try and climb over or up the stands or down the stands to that odor. Risky. Paws can get stuck in things. Those chairs, the seats flip up and down. There's a variety of things. There are other environmental hazards you're looking at. If you're gonna be checking a lot of cars going into a garage, well, making sure they're off, making sure that dog's not checking any licking up any leaked antifreeze, things like that are there. Look for those things, get them out of the way, make your dog safe as you proceed. And again, legal constraints. Do you have the right to be where you are doing what you're doing? There's less legal contention about explosive detection dogs than there is about narcotics dogs. If you take a look at the sheepdog guardian cases, the detector dog case law is abundant, and there's not much about explosive detection dogs. And that's because the relative availability of money to make a legal challenge and a variety of things, and just the sheer volume of dope that's being moved from one place to another in our country. Search and rescue, this is where my start was before I got in law enforcement. I was never an operational search and rescue handler. I wound up going to the Army after about a year working with the German search dogs of Washington State, but it left an indelible impression on me because search and rescue is comprised largely of volunteers, and very often the law enforcement professionals are emergency management people that may be search managers, or they may be in charge of acquiring resources, and you have a dedicated search manager in this organization. But one way or the other, these search dogs are doing important work. It's hard work, and it's hard to keep the dogs up, and it's important that we understand that they're working dogs that will find living people. Sometimes they'll find human remains. Search and rescue operations become recovery operations pretty quickly, particularly like in avalanche environments and things like that, or waterborne. So your dogs have to wear many hats. And so this air bias thing, I'm a firm believer in a narrow repertoire that has really deep reinforcement history and is very fluent. Rather than a dog that knows a lot of stuff pretty well, I want a dog that knows a few things really well. That's just my personal bias. Everybody else can make a different trade-off for themselves. But one way or the other, you want to make sure that errors of both types are minimized on this and that your specialty is clearing areas and giving your search managers the information they need to proceed about that area that you had. When you're looking at the environmental hazards, they're gonna be different when you go from an urban environment to wilderness. HRD dogs can wind up working at a crime scene, or they could be working out in the woods in a different kind of crime scene. Dogs that are doing waterborne searches where they're searching for HRD underwater is gonna be different than a dog that's doing avalanche work where time is of the essence and they're digging in and stuff like that. And then you've got the trailing dogs that are doing that, and that's gonna be another thing that's gonna be more akin to the patrol dog. So anybody who's got a trailing dog, I'll touch on that when we do part 3. As we go through this, you have to prepare your dog for those environmental hazards. One of the things in working with search and rescue organizations like I have before with FEMA task forces and at the National Search Dog Center, getting the dogs accustomed to rubble before you're asking them to do work on it is a really good thing. And it's important whether it's the rubble or whether it's scree on a mountainside. Getting your dog comfortable with that so that they don't shut down when they get into the operation is a really valuable thing for you to do. Also realize, stay in your lane. It's very easy for someone to try and put pressure on you to go ahead and do things that you're not ready for. Your dog isn't that's not in their scope yet. So make sure that, you know, that you're operating within your scope of training and your scope of expertise. It's one of those things I think search and rescue people take seriously, but people from the outside don't understand, and square pegs fit in round holes, and it doesn't work very well. Also, if you have support resources like an air unit, make sure that your dog gets a lot of time getting acclimated to that, getting in and out, traveling in it, and then getting to do something fun associated with it so that that doesn't become a stressor that shuts them down when they get out there, and it's tough because air units are expensive to run, and that's a harder thing to get done because the resources are expensive. But if you can get them practice, like, for example, just getting in and out of it and spending time sitting in it, that the thing itself is comfortable, then when they start moving, you're gonna have a whole new piece of acclimation to do, but that kind of stuff, search and rescue organizations are pretty good doing. Now, what happens if you're working in an area you're unfamiliar with and they pair you with a local guide, someone who's familiar with it, and your dog is not used to working with somebody by your side? This is one of those things where teamwork is really good. Law enforcement does it with arrest teams a lot, but when I was a deputy back in the '80s, we were out by ourselves looking for people with our dogs with nobody running with us. Foolish by today's standards. Foolish, absolutely foolish. And hopefully search and rescue people aren't just given an area to handle by their own, but one way or the other, if you have somebody that's part of a search team with you, get your dog acclimated to having people with them in general, but also give them time to get used to your new local guide. I'm sure there is much more to this. For example, there are pieces of this that we didn't talk about when it comes to the narcotics dogs, that you might be doing waterborne searches where you're boarding a vessel and searching a vessel. Then you're gonna have to consider everything there is, the occupancy spaces, the engine spaces, the wheelhouse, the decks, the stores. All of those are pieces that we have to consider, and I can't there's no way I can get all the considerations for search and rescue and all the considerations for explosives. This is about principles. And the principles that I see violated most often are improperly formed chains and people asking more of the dog than they prepared them to deliver. And that's really kind of where we're at. I think I want to talk about this is the fundamental piece in here. If you build fluency in this 3 behavior chain where it is so robust that the dog can perform anywhere, anytime, you're going to be in good shape. But a lot of people underestimate the impact of the environment and the operating circumstances on the dog when they're doing their search work. The other thing that you need to do is let the dog do their thing. When the dog is searching, shut your mouth, keep your eyes open, your ears listening, maybe even put your nose to the wind yourself. I like to talk, and if I'm talking to my dog, I miss things. So I've had to learn to just shut my mouth and watch him work and just go, "Oh, that was really cool." Because if I'm talking, I'm not processing what I'm seeing nearly as well. Respect their role. The dog is the detector. You are the one that manages the search and make sure and try and make it interesting. "Oh, what's over here? Let's go check this, buddy." Rather than trying to be rigid about this system. Keep this partnership alive with you managing the search in a way that it keeps it fun for the dog, because for dogs, they don't really have work ethics. A lot of them don't have work ethics nearly as much as we think they do. If it ain't fun, it ain't done. If you keep it fun, they're in it. They'll stay in it. They'll enjoy it. And then also remember that if they detect something and they can't get the source, your job is to analyze that, look at it, make an interpretation and inference about what's going on. And then we go from there. Your strategies may vary one way or the other. Figure out what's most important to you. You could take what I put up there before about the tolerance for misses versus non-productive responses and say that, sorry, we don't accept anything like that. We want to get as close to 100% on all of it as you can. Knock yourself out. I'm not here to tell you that there is a way to do that. There are a lot of ways to approach this. Look at the search strategies, but make an informed decision, because again, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. And one way or the other, whatever strategy you do, make sure your searches are systematic and thorough. Cover the bases, make sure the productive areas are covered. I can't tell you the number of times I've watched good dogs and good handlers just kind of, through a momentary lapse, miss a productive area. A handler not paying attention, that a sniff at a spot wasn't an actual sniff, it was just a ceremonial, "I'm gonna move my nose by it." Use all your senses. Listen for that dog to actually sniff that productive area and make a decision about whether it is hot or not, and let that dog move on. Be flexible, adapt, figure out how you're going to change what you do. It's good for your dog to learn that, for example, you're not always gonna be graceful on your feet. Let that dog learn that sometimes you're gonna trip over things, you're gonna stumble, you're gonna wind up having tension on the lead, so they learn to do their job despite human ineptitude, because we all have our moments when we're not as smooth as we could be. And then train for the physical conditions you're gonna be in. You know, USAR dogs get that rubble work in early, so they just, they love being on the rubble, and they think all kinds of fun things happen there, and the good thing is that that will carry over to their search work. Detector dogs, narcotics detector dogs, get them into chaotic spaces, get them over things that are places that are maybe not the cleanest you've ever been, and maybe not the neatest, most orderly, because that's probably where they're gonna be working a lot of times. Also get them used to working into vehicles that have a ton of air fresheners in there, because somebody thinks that's gonna hide the odor, things like that. Train for the conditions in which you're going to work. Explosive detection dogs, if you do a lot of stuff in a certain training environment and then all of a sudden you're thrust into a stadium and your dog's not ready for it, get them used to not only the physical environment, but the people and the activity there. Get the dog comfortable in that environment before you ask them to do work for you there. And then next, most important, come back next month for part 3, which is gonna be about patrol dog strategies and tactics. That's kinda wrapping up what we've talked about today. I'd like to go ahead and leave this screen up here with the members of the best practices group. We could not do this without the support of all of them, and the United States Police Canine Association truly being committed to making its members the most professional canine handlers they could possibly be. With that done, I'm gonna wrap it up and throw the ball to you.
Thanks, Steve. Once again, you really outdid yourself. And I know that I was sitting there listening to the things and understood that there's some things I've even forgot about that you brought up again. Thank you very much.
Absolutely my pleasure.
That wraps it up for us. This video will be probably out on YouTube in about a week. And so from that, thanks again, Steve. Thank you all of the best practices group for helping and making this a really great video. Thank you.
Absolutely my pleasure.
This video was brought to you by the United States Police Canine Association. If you found this information helpful, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next video. For more information, check out our website www.uspcak9.com and at USPCA Canine. Thank you for watching and stay safe.